Halito, and welcome to Native Chalk Talk, a podcast by natives for all. Here we're keeping our Native ancestors' stories and history alive, while also sharing with you our Native culture, traditions, and more. I'm Rachel Youngman, a Choctaw originally from Anadarko, Oklahoma. I hope you'll enjoy this journey with me as we learn from our Native American guests. And I hope you'll do me a favor. Feel free to like and share these episodes. I so appreciate it. Yakoki.
I am more than a craftsman.
I am more than a firefighter.
More than a teacher.
Than a student.
A business owner.
Than a leader.
A healer.
I am more than a champion.
Chatta Ilfina Chili.
Tata Elefanachili.
I am Choctaw proud.
I am Choctaw proud.
I am Choctaw proud.
We are the Choctaw Nation, and together we're more.
What do some of the most prominent and successful Indigenous artists, leaders, and professors have in common? They aren't Indigenous. There are hundreds of cases of Indigenous identity fraud that we know about, and likely thousands that we do not. So, why do these so called pretendians do it? How do they pull it off, and what happens when they're exposed? In each episode of a riveting new podcast series, Pretendians, co-host Robert Jago, Kwantlen First Nation, and Nooksack Indian Tribe, and Angel Ellis Muscogee Creek Nation reveal unbelievable stories of audacious fraudsters and investigate the complex phenomenon of Indigenous identity theft. You just heard the description of a new podcast that just came out this year in 2024 that's knocking people's socks off. Today, I'm talking to the co-host of the show, Pretendians, that goes beyond just calling out non-Native people who claim Indigenous ancestry, but also discusses the ramifications of this issue, such as cheating people and the government out of money and teaching false Native history, culture, and practices. So listeners, buckle your seatbelts because it's going to be a bumpy but interesting ride, and we'll get to hear a portion of the first show, so you'll get a good feel for its fascinating content. Robert and Angel, welcome to Native Chalk Talk.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. In a moment, we'll learn about your own backgrounds and ancestral history. But for now, let's dive into this podcast. Pretendians launched on May 15th of this year, and the entire season is out now, correct?
Yes. Yep.
That's right. Although we have one bonus episode coming up that we're going to be recording soon.
Oh, I can't wait to hear it. So how many episodes are there in this first season?
With the bonus episode, there'll be 7.
Okay. Congratulations. And I assume folks can find the show on most platforms like Spotify, Apple Music, and so on, correct?
The so on being Amazon Music as well. Yes.
Great.
You can listen to it ad-free.
Perfect. So something I love about the podcast is the Native humor that plays out. Well done. For those who may not yet know the term, why don't you tell us about the meaning behind the word pretendian?
It's basically that person who impersonates a native. They put on, the native identity and they show it to other people. So they're pretendians instead of Indians.
Pretendians. And I think it's very fitting, very simple to remember as well, because we're starting to see it more and more. I'm starting to hear the term a lot more. Robert, anything else you'd add to that?
The word's from the culture. It's been around for more than a decade. It's not the first time we've had a term for it. The word everybody used to use was wannabes, or someone from the I'm a wannabe tribe. That was the more common one. But pretendian seems to have taken over. It's portmanteau, pretend Indians, pretendians. And it's sort of like the capstone of a whole bunch of new terminology below it. So there's like pretendian, defendian, carendian, descendian, and now there's a whole bunch of other things based on it.
something I think is important to note is this isn't just a chance to point fingers and call people out. It's exposing some folks who, in many cases, have cheated the government and individuals of funds and donations. And it's about people committing fraud beyond just pretending to be another race. This isn't just all fun and games. So, something we need to take seriously. I would hope that people will learn from these stories and think twice before taking advantage of people's kindness, especially regarding people who have already been exploited and taken advantage of. Now, when the two of you are doing this podcast, is that what you're also thinking? Is that your hope is to really kind of shed light on something that's much more important than some people may know?
Yeah, I think that like what really originally drew me to this kind of story is that Robert's pitch originally focused, like, it's focusing on the highest level of the influence, right? Like somebody
Mhm.
can just be walking around and at Creek Festival and they can say that they're like
Right.
sixth great grandmother, but they're not really like, that's not really impacting the tribe per se. But his approach came with this distinction of these are high level people who influence in a big way and take away from our tribes and actually hurt,
Mhm.
the tribal community. And so that was a really big thing that made me think, oh, this is probably a good thing to get in on. I like that it was high impact focused and that it was like exposing things beyond just the person impersonating. It's exposing systematic uh abuse too.
And especially when there's money involved.
Yeah.
So my thinking behind the series. Okay, let's deal with this in two parts. Number one, do you have a teenager right now, by the way, in your home?
I actually am an empty nester, so she's in her 20s.
Oh, so you're so
But
lucky.
I've been through the gauntlet. I get
No,
it.
no, no. You weren't through the gauntlet when they had TikTok.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah. So I have a TikTok teenager. And when you have a TikTok teenager, they like to go on TikTok and then they read about all of these things, and suddenly they have all of these things.
Mhm.
So one week they're, everybody has multiple personalities. Now they have multiple personalities, and you have to pretend to
And
be
everybody's a
yourself.
narcissist. Yeah. There's
Yeah,
a lot of
exactly.
education out there.
Yeah,
Scary.
and that's really kind of the bulk of what you see with pretendians out there are people just doing
Mhm.
stuff like that. And it's
Yeah.
silly and it's a phase and it goes away and whatever. That's fine. I mean, those people can be a little bit aggressive when you're actually dealing with an actual pretending issue. They're the ones that come up and yell at you and say whatever buzzword TikTok told them to say that day.
Right.
At you. That's
Right.
the bulk of it. But on top of it, there are these really important major cases where people die. People go to jail. There are sex crimes. There are multi-million dollar, multi-billion dollar thefts in some cases, where like they try and take our cemeteries, they try and take our land. Um, those are there are a lot of those out there, and it's supported
Yeah.
by the down below. And our goal was to attack the phenomenon as a whole, but by going at the larger targets so that we
Yeah.
could, over these 6 core episodes. So we tried to deal with the issue in 6 parts, and in each episode pulls apart a different piece of the phenomenon, and we go after it by demonstrating a particular part of pretendingism in this person.
Yeah.
So in one episode, we're dealing with the fake organizations. In the other episode, we're dealing with like how this impacts the weakest or the most vulnerable parts of our population, and so on throughout the series. So
Yeah.
anyway, that's the whole concept of it.
Well
I hope it
said.
makes sense.
Yeah. And if nothing else, it's just interesting and very educational for folks who have never heard of it before. And they can I think we can all kind of keep an eye out for that kind of thing too, and not just fall for everything we see on TikTok, for instance. So, listeners, today we'll talk about the very first episode as an example of what you can expect to hear from Pretendians. And I do hope you'll go take a listen to it. A word to the moms and dads out there. There is some language and strong topics discussed in the podcast, just a fair warning. So, question for y'all: how do you find these pretendians and how do you research their backgrounds? Because you found things about some folks that aren't really easily accessible or just sitting out there on Google, for instance.
I think that a lot of the Native community has looked at this phenomenon for such a long time that they all have kind of their own you know, ideas of who would make a good central figure to communicate that phenomenon of pretendianism. I'm from Oklahoma, and so my own state's governor was naturally a subject of this. It's something that all of my community has talked about, and then others too, because he claims to be Cherokee, and so it was something I was seeing in the headlines as just a civically engaged person. And so it became kind of a natural discussion. And then I kind of wrote some of the Hollywood episode, and that was another really big discussion that was happening really broadly as we were seeing more Native representation in Hollywood. It seems like a natural place to start to kind of look at how Hollywood has perpetuated pretendianism through their practices and kind of break that apart and examine it a little bit. So some of the topics have just kind of, since the episodes have come out, people start emailing you and DMing you and saying, oh, you should really look
raising
at
their hands. I have somebody.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, that's fascinating. And when you talked about the Hollywood thing, I didn't even think about that, how now that there's so much more spotlight on Native Americans and our stories, that there's probably going to be even more coming out of the woodwork. And that's just really sad because that's taking away options for others who may be wanting to get into acting and can't because some non-Native has taken their place.
But it's the way they take their place as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think one thing that we say in that episode is that, I think every Native person has had the experience where you meet someone new and they're like, you don't look Native.
Yes.
And it's because the portrayal of Natives by often cases frauds is so cheesy and so stereotypical. And it's all about, fitting in for the white gaze, like what they expect to see. And a lot of what they expect to see isn't what we look like.
Right.
I mean, I think about, you ever been to Congress? If you go to the rotunda at the top of it, they've got paintings that are there and they portray Natives. And it's just the most disgusting, ugly stereotypes. Like, it's so racist, they don't host Native delegations there. They send Natives to the basement. And the reason it's like that is because it was created by an Italian painter who had never been to the Americas. And he was just going on what he had seen and heard about from the culture. And now that's what people see as Native. That's what is reflected back at the center of America.
Of course.
And that's kind of like what you see with Hollywood. And what we said during the episode is when you actually see actual Native actors, in a show like Reservation Dogs, for example, I think that the non-Native watching that comes away and from that with like a better understanding of who we are, to the point that if you see them and you tell them you're Native, they're not going to say, hey, you don't look Native. Whereas they would if they came out after seeing like Tonto or whatever, with the Lone Ranger.
Right. Little Johnny
I mean,
Depp
like, where is
action.
your head bird? You don't have a bird on your head?
I love the Res Dogs example because like there's actually a pretendian character in Reservation Dogs.
Yes, right.
Like the guy who runs the junkyard is like got his beaded choker on, and he's like always trying to sacred stuff up, and they're just like, the hell's up with this guy?
So what do you think it says about these people who go around looking for attention by pretending to be Native? Are they narcissists? Do they maybe have mental health issues, just need attention? Are they greedy? What do you think it is?
Well, I mean, we've looked at some different kinds of folks who pretend. And on the one level, I think that first episode was complete narcissism at work there. Like there's a person using it completely to their benefit and giving zero back. It was so extractive. And then by the time we got to the last episode, we were dealing with just regular people who were really just trying to understand their family stories and who they were. And they were uncovering very important traumas and how those traumas affected them and their understanding of who they were. And those people I would hate to call narcissistic. I would hate to say that it was, anything malignant or terrible. They were just really trying to discover. And I think that we've also pinpointed that something very common with folks who pretend is that they were trying to escape something else. That was trying to escape an identity that was shameful or picked on in the community at large. They just didn't happen to know they were picking another person who was being picked. The native is often picked on as well. And so, but they were showed stories where the native is the stoic and very,
right,
good to be. And so they were using that as a tool to escape where they were coming from. So I think there was multiple different motivations. And it's kind of, hard for those folks. I didn't think I would feel sympathy towards that last episode, hearing stories of people genuinely not knowing and often discovering family secrets that were hard to uncover. It was like, oh wow, I didn't realize that as a Native person who has a very documented family history, that I had an advantage in that, right? I didn't understand that gave me a leg up on the rest of the world. Because while we deal with our stuff, right? We have our problems, but we know who our people are. For the most part, we don't have that identity crisis that the rest of the world is in. And so in a time when people are really struggling with connection, it was something that was less malicious in the regular everyday, but you could see how when you add money, power, influence, it became more malicious, more sinister. So that's kind of what I took away from this season.
Yeah, people start typically from an honest place, an honest mistake place. But at a point, something switches, it flips over.
Yeah.
And then it's just naked fraud and greed.
It's kind of sad because, again, I think behind a lot of that is either pain or low self-esteem as well, wanting to belong. And when it does turn sinister, it's more than just pretending something you're not. It's hurting other people. Well, there's a certain pretendian named Guillaume Carle who is ever deserving of being the subject of that first episode you mentioned. And what I especially love about it is, Robert, you actually got to meet with him and hear his take on his actions. So let's learn about this character, Guillaume. What can you tell us about his past?
Guillaume. What can I tell you about Guillaume Carle? Okay. So there's a couple different ways to tell it. Guillaume Carle is a Franco-Ontarian. So he's from Ontario. He's a French speaker. His father looked like Norm Macdonald. His mother looked like Shirley Temple. Okay. And, very blue eyes. The father was a cop. The mother, I think, a doctor or a nurse. He was raised in a good family. It looks like a good middle-class family in the capital city. And at some point, he went and stayed with his grandfather in the forest, and that appeared to have a very big impact on him. It didn't seem
so
to
he, apologies, he really did live in the forest?
I don't have any reason to doubt him on that. So in the episode, he says that he was raised in the forest amongst the trees. He also says that he went to kindergarten in Ottawa, in Gatineau, wherever. Okay, so if we just think about the timeline, how long did he actually spend living in the trees, in the forest? Was it a summer? Because that's what it sounds like.
Was it a camping trip?
Yeah, so at some point in his youth, he went camping with his grandpa. And as a consequence, it had a very deep impact on him. And from that point forward, he decided that, he must have strong Native roots or some affinity or I don't know. Anyways, that's him. He grows up, he goes to technical school, He joins the army and becomes a MP, the most beloved people in the entire army. And then leaves the service, becomes a male model, apparently. Young Guillaume Carle kind of looks, I don't know, what would you say, like a Pierce Brosnan kind of guy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or Steven Seagal.
Steven Seagal, thank you. Young Steven Seagal, not modern
Yeah.
Steven
Okay.
Seagal, who, by
Yeah.
the way, says he's Mohawk, I believe.
Oh,
Really.
Side
now
issue.
you need to dig into that.
I don't want to dig into that because that would require
Episode 8.
watching Steven Seagal movies. Have you seen the Steven Seagal movie? He just sits in a chair and does karate now. Anyway, so Guillaume Carle, he does all this stuff. He starts a tech business, and then his tech business becomes a little bit more successful, and he decides at that point to run for leadership in the Alliance d'Autochtones de Québec, so the Quebec Indigenous Alliance, and this is around 2000. Now, what I need to say here is that around this time in Canada, around 1990, that's like the rebirth of hardcore machine gun toting militant Native activism in Canada.
Okay.
And 1990 is this thing called the Oka crisis. And it's why Canada didn't send land forces to Iraq, is because they were too busy at home dealing with this. And that's when there was an uprising of Mohawk people. They seized the bridges into Montreal. They killed a cop. They got into gun battles. The army had to eventually move in. And if you are a young man who had a not particularly impressive military career, and you have this romantic notion of the forest, there's nothing cooler that you can think of than these Mohawk warriors. Like, our newspapers were blazoned by this like picture of this Mohawk warrior with a bandana, a machine gun, standing face to face about an inch away from a soldier, and like facing him down. And so that appeals to Carle. And from what I understand, at that point, he like starts telling people, "Oh yeah, I'm one of them. I'm a Mohawk, not just a regular Mohawk, too, a Mohawk from that community."
Oh, wow.
And that seems to be when this pretendian thing really started or really took off with him. And it builds and builds and builds and builds. And then something terrible happens mid-90s, which we'll come back to maybe later. And anyways, at the end of it, he gets sucked into this really kind of not 100% legitimate, but not totally illegitimate Native group in Quebec. He magically becomes their leader. And that's when he goes from just being a wannabe to being like a full-fledged check cashing pretendian.
Wow. And was he in his 40s at this point?
About that, yeah.
I kind of think of Guillaume's next phase of life like he's the pretendian fairy, and he takes his wand and creates 50,000 other pretendians.
You get to be an Indian. You get to be an Indian.
Yeah. He's like Oprah giving it away.
Right?
Like, you're an Indian. You're an
There
Indian.
you go. You get a CAIB card. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, we don't do blood quantum here, but yeah. So what happens to Guillaume Carle next? He now that he has to actually run an organization that does stuff like housing and has federal contracts and grant money, he tanks it. If you've ever taken federal money, your main job isn't to deliver the services with that federal money. It's to fill out forms from the feds and tell them what you did with their money. And he doesn't fill out those forms. And the feds come to his office again and again and again and again, 5 times. And he just doesn't show, and he won't show them the books. This puts the organization into disrepute. The feds eventually have to like force the books. And they find all these irregularities, including, weird contracts and stuff. And it causes an uprising in the organization. They kick him out. There's a lawsuit, one of many, one of dozens and dozens and dozens. And at that point, he says to someone at the organization, "You're not really Native." Everyone at the organization says, no, you're not really Native. And that's kind of when we get the first pretending accusations about him. Now, his organization,
He just creates his own organization. He got kicked out of a legitimate one and formed his own.
Oh boy.
with almost the same name.
Oh my goodness.
And he calls his own organization the Confederation of Aboriginal Peoples. And he basically sets it up as a competitor to the organization he was just kicked out of. The only difference is that he's leader for life in this new organization. And not just
boy.
like leader,
Leader
he's
for life.
yes. And he sets up all these weird rules as an organization, like culty stuff. Like when he comes in the room, everybody has to rise.
Oh no.
And they have to address him by his new magical title.
Which is?
His Excellency Grand Chief Guillaume Carle.
Oh, so lovely.
Yeah, I've never heard of an Indian with the term His Excellency in the name.
It's
So
like interweaving the monarchy with
yes
tribalism. We'll just cabbage patch this all together however we like it.
right.
mm-hmm.
Oh my God. And again, talk about ego, narcissism. It's all him.
Canada has a long tradition of people claiming to be royal, so it's a thing that he's
Oh,
got from the culture. Anyways, he runs this organization and he does a whole bunch of things. He gets millions of dollars in federal contracts into his company. He partners with a shady DNA company and sells tests to people. And then they get the tests and then they join the organization, whether they're native or not, or in some cases, whether they're human or not.
Unbelievable. What?
Maybe it's a dog, and maybe the dog is native.
Your dog is needed.
They get a card too.
In one case, a member was really like sus about like what the tests were, so he sent in his dog's DNA, and quelle surprise, the dog turned out to be native too. Now, the next thing he does is he decides that he's going to start selling investments to his membership. He now has like 50,000 of the most proven gullible people that verifiably gullible people that you could find in the country. And so he decides to start selling investments in property around Canada. And you know, he's selling these investments whether he owns the property or not. This is before the courts, so this is the word alleged before all of this. And people get mad, he seizes their investments, and now there's fraud charges. And the craziest thing about the fraud charges is how he's charged with fraud. Because when they give him the fraud charges, they find him at the courthouse where he's at that moment on trial for sex crimes.
Uh-oh.
Which
you
he was
think that he'd
convicted
want to
of.
lie low if he had sex crimes, but no.
No. So he actually was convicted. He was convicted of crimes involving a 12-year-old boy in the mid-90s.
Oh my God.
And I guess you don't need the details. But anyways, he was
Damn.
convicted. He has not yet gone to jail, which is amazing to me.
Walking
The system is broken.
Yeah, the system has to be broken. How has he gotten away with all this? I mean, didn't even promise like tax breaks to people who shop at Walmart or something if they're one of the members?
Yeah,
Silly like that.
yeah. If you have yeah, it's like Sam's Club, but Guillaume's Club. So if you have a card, a status card in Canada, you don't have to pay tax on your purchases.
God.
And in this province, tax is a lot. The CBC did an investigation and they found people who had been told by other people in this organization to go and use those cards at Walmart, among other places, to get the discount. I mean, that's not a small amount of money. I'm in the market for a new computer.
Yep.
The computer here costs about $4,000. And the tax on that is a ton. It's like $500 tax on that, like $750 tax on that, were I to buy it at off res. So I've been looking around for an Apple store in res. And because I mean, $750 is nothing to shrug at. And that's the scale of that times 50,000 people.
Yeah, that's no joke.
Mm-mm.
According to the Ottawa Citizen in 2021, this confederation claimed its holders would benefit from rights guaranteed to Indigenous people in Canada, particularly in matters of taxation and hunting, causing monetary prejudice to users. The victims who paid membership fees were not only left with monetary losses, but also with what investigators termed invalid fees, such as initiation fees and other charges for use of the cards, police alleged. I wonder how much some of these people were out money. Like, how much were the membership fees? I wonder,
They were, I think, $80. Good
$80
math.
times
80 times
50,000.
50,000.
And you get tax rates at Walmart, other places.
Yes,
That's
not just Walmart. But
crazy.
And then when he was competing for government contracts that were set aside for Indigenous, organizations, he was funneling millions of dollars into his personal business from the government to his organization to his personal business. I think it was 7.5 million or something like that.
7.5 million. And the
Good.
craziest thing, which we learned after this episode, is that he's suing the federal government for taking him off the Indigenous procurement list.
Are you kidding me?
Right?
So he has the nerve to sue the government for being fraudulent himself. So he's a sex offender. He's full of fraud. He stole from people, basically, lied, of course. And then on top of it, has he ever spent enough time in jail does he have to pay the government back or somebody back for the government contracts that he fraudulently had?
That's an issue in this country, and it seems like no. And there's
Okay.
been another Indigenous procurement fraud case that's been really big, and that's like a $10 million one. And no, like you just get to keep it, and just
Whoa. I
yes,
wonder what he did
If
with
this
the money. Like, he can't be good with money, you would think.
he's a real estate mogul too. This is the one thing I learned during the interview is that he was boasting about all
Mhm.
the homes he owns.
Oh my Lord. So okay, so when you talked to him, what kind of feeling did you get when you talked to him? Did you feel the narcissism?
I found him to be really out of his depth on the topic.
Mm.
I was just, what really overwhelmed me was the sense of profound, inexplicable ignorance of Native people, Native institutions, Native law, of the whole playing field of which he claims to be, the star. And he doesn't know anything. It was really shocking.
Well, and that's the
and it's
unfortunate
like
thing is there are a lot of people who are naive and innocently so, and that's why we all need to be listening to Pretendians, because I think it will really open up our eyes and help us to see past some of that fraud. Angel, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, Robert does this incredible job of maintaining a really professional tone with this guy. And it's like every time Robert kind of leaned in and asked for more details, this man he would, oh, I've had 4 strokes. He would start becoming this fragile health, and he would lean on that in order
Of
to kind of
course.
divert to another topic. And then Robert even asks about his claims to clan, and he doesn't know what to say to that
Oh, I
initially.
love that.
Yeah,
He's
Robert's
so
like, what's your
good.
clan? Yeah, Robert says, what's your clan? And he's like, blah blah blah, and then Robert's like, so is it like, this or that? And then he just picks one and just goes with it. And we have contacts, and Robert verifies this with the actual people, and no one knows who he is. And so I don't think that, sometimes this podcast is really geared toward that mainstream culture audience, and they don't always know that these people saying, oh, I'm this clan, that's verifiable. That's family. And if your
Mhm.
family don't know you, you're probably not from that place.
Yeah, it's our communities are small, and even the largest of our tribes, there's a lot of connection. There's a lot of interconnection. So we can figure y'all out, okay? And just so our
Yeah.
listeners can get a taste of what kind of guy this Excellency, the Grand Chief, is, I'm going to share a portion of the interview where he talks about that affiliation with the Mohawk tribe. So here goes.
And my parents don't come from the reserve life. They could not live there, and they didn't impose to me to live there. The real life of Native people is not on reserve because there's nothing there. There's no animals, there's no traditional, nothing. Everything that's on reserve is not native.
I'm from Kwantlen First Nation, and we have all of our resources with us. We're fishermen. We live on 2 rivers. Our mountain reserves have our elk in it. So I do disagree with your portrayal of reserves as nothings. We have everything that we've always had there. So is your family still tied to one of the Mohawk clans?
My family, yes.
Which Mohawk clan is your family a part of?
Well, Akwesasne, I guess, would be where I spent the most time. And my 2 boys each carry a sacred pipe, and they know the ways.
Just returning to the clan thing, is your mother from the Turtle Clan or a Bear Clan? Like, on Mohawk they have all these different clan houses.
I know that, yes.
So which one is it?
Turtle Clan.
I see. Okay. So from what I understand, you're quite young and you're living in the forest in Manawaki, and then you go to Gatineau for school. Is that right?
Yes. I went to the white man's school, and I finished with a PhD in computer science.
After school, I understand that you then went into the army?
I went into the army. I became a police officer, and I resigned from that because I could not face the rest of my life giving tickets and arresting people and so on. Everything that I'm telling you is not a lie. It's the truth. So it's important to say, really, honestly, the minimum that I owe you is the truthness of what I say.
I love how you press him, Robert, on what clan he's from. That is just brilliant. You would think if you were going to be such a fraudster and make that much money, you would actually do some due diligence, especially on who you are as a Native American, supposedly. And of course, the Mohawk Council has said he's completely unaffiliated with them, as you mentioned.
He actually threatens Robert in the afterlife.
Yes.
Like the craziest. And I remember hearing that, because my reaction to the recording is my real reaction. And I was just like, oh my God, how did you?
Well, my favorite quote of His Excellency is this little gem. The minimum of what I owe you is the truthness of what I say. Or maybe he said truthfulness, but I listened to it over and over and it sounded like he said the truthness. Anyway, it was hilarious. So listeners, feel free to use this quote anytime you're trying to get someone to believe you. Maybe someone out there could turn it into like a meme for us, maybe. Such a work of art. But the brilliance doesn't stop here. Tell us about what he said about being raised in the forest.
I kept thinking of Mowgli, and he's like, the snake is cradling him to sleep at night. And I'm like, were you raised with wolves or with people, friend? Because being alone doesn't seem like anything distinctly native to me. In fact, kind of the opposite. I have a large family. There was always family around. There was always cousins. There was always people. And I just spent the whole weekend with 100,000 folks at our festival, like hiding off into the woods. What are you
why were you in the
woods? His idea of Indian is feral.
What?
It's like that Rousseau thing. It's like in mankind in an original state of nature, which is very francophone and educated of him, but it's not necessarily in any way native.
I like how he also made analogies that sound native, like you can't ask the wolf to be a German shepherd. So native. So Angel, you said something I thought was right on during the episode. You mentioned that he says all the all the mystical crap that everyone assumes is part of Native identity. And I couldn't agree more when I saw that. I see that so much with people going, I'm channeling kind of the Native spirituality. And so they buy the t-shirts with the wolf and the moon, or, they say things that sound Native, and it's just so cheesy.
I think that they grew up watching those films, right? Those ones that were
Yes.
like the when he says the truthness of my words, it's like he's intentionally mimicking the Hollywood script of the
Yes.
savage native who doesn't speak English so well, and he's
Right.
projecting that out.
He also mentioned in the interview that he just didn't know how to lie. Anyway, funny. So tell us about what he got wrong when he was talking about the reserves, or what we in the United States call the reservations.
His conception of reserves was that they're not bona fide indigenous communities. He said that and this is very common with pretendian organizations. They say that the only real natives are the ones that didn't fall under federal control and end up on reserve. The only real natives are the ones that they, I guess, went into the woods, or they secretly hid their identity, like they're Anne Frank or something.
Goodness.
There's maybe, I'm sure some such person somewhere existed, but it's vanishingly rare. I mean, the res, in most cases, here at least, was built on top of the Native community. I mean, we didn't have, 300 years of Indian wars, right? So, that's where the village was. That's where it's been for, 3,000 years. And that's now where the res is. It was built around the old village. He's acting like he thinks that this is like we were picked up, displaced, concentrated into one place and dumped there, as opposed to this is a village. They built a wall around it, cut off our hinterland and our hunting grounds. And so he's saying that all the people here are completely illegitimate, and we're passive, and we're domesticated. We're the German Shepherd in that analogy. And he's the wolf, the one that went off into the countryside and intermarried for 200 generations and has not a drop of Native blood left in him. That's the real Native, not us.
Again, narcissist much.
He fails to recognize that not every tribe was removed from their homelands. Mine was, but also we still have established connections to those homelands too. There are places along the Trail of Tears where we have held sacred, they're held as sacred places. And so we haven't lost all that much in the grand scheme of things. So his idea that the natives on reserves are somehow defeated and not what they were before is just absolutely asinine and insulting, really, to Native communities.
That is insulting. The part that makes me think he has to have some real issues that need to be addressed is his talking about being threatened. He said 2 people tried to kill him and busted his head through his brain.
That's true. People who are beating him up aren't Native people. It's the people in his grifter organizations. But I've seen pictures. He got beat bad.
Dang.
$7.5 million is the kind of money that makes people disappear.
That's tip of the iceberg of how much money we're talking about.
Oh my God. Well, and I know we're joking about his excessiveness, but the truth is his actions caused harm to others. And in the research you've done on other pretendians, what harm do pretendians cause to our Indigenous communities and even the non-Native community?
The non-Native community is really missed out on understanding who their Indigenous neighbors really are, because pretendians, because they control so much of the narrative. The non-Native community has never really gotten to know the Indigenous community. It's a tangible loss to them. They may not even know it yet, but they have missed some of the lessons and principles that guide the Indigenous community. And I think if you look at our world at large, it could use a lot of Indigenous values right now. And that's a travesty, to be honest. What the people pretending, what Guillaume Carle and the Casper we met are taking from Native people, that is a very measurable thing. Like they are taking absolute place and service from Native people. And by doing that, by displacing the Native people, they're creating this narrative out there in the world. The data is starting to reflect that crazy things are happening, right? Like, oh, there's an explosion of the Native population. That's not really true. But the data is saying it's so, because Native self-identification is the standard. And so it's conflating numbers in prisons, and it's conflating different data sets, and it's going to be hard to determine where we do need to devote resources to in order to support the Indigenous communities.
Good point. I didn't even think about that. So listeners, I know you're wanting to go listen to the show, so do it and let us know what you think. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Stay tuned for part 2 coming up. Thanks for listening to Native Chalk Talk. Be sure to join our community on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and check us out at nativechalktalk.com. Stay tuned for the next episode. You're going to love it. Yakoki. Thank you, my friends.